Inside the Birds is back. What's going on, everybody? Adam Caplan, Geoff Mosher here. And Adam, before we get into anything Eagles related, it's pretty cool. We have a Super Bowl showdown. It will be Andy Reid and the Kansas City Chiefs, the team I predicted to be in the Super Bowl, against the San Francisco 49ers, a team that I did not predict to be in the Super Bowl. What are your? I think we both were. I think we both picked Eagles,
Chiefs before the season started. Yep.
But I picked the Chiefs to win. I think you might have picked the Eagles. Either way, Eagles not in it. But what do you think about this match?
I don't remember. I thought I picked the Chiefs to win it, but the opening line, by the way, is the Chiefs -1. The total is 52. By the way, in the championship games, I did pick those correct. I picked the Niners, though the score, the game went over. That surprised me, Geoff.
Yeah.
But I had the Niners winning by 10, 27-17. Obviously, that was not the score. The Niners and Raheem Mostert, Geoff, I don't know. It's unbelievable. Did you know his feet were that quick? I know he's a track guy, but my God, is he good.
Well, I mean, I didn't realize it until this year because I've watched them quite a lot this year. And listen, if there's one takeaway, Adam, right, when you watch the Chiefs and you'll watch the 49ers play in the Super Bowl, is that there's going to be a tremendous amount of speed on the field for both teams and a lot of offensive ingenuity. And when you think about it from an Eagles standpoint, this is something that we said last week in our roster, outlook going into the offseason, is that the Eagles need to get younger and faster. They need to be dynamic for Doug Pederson to really get the offense that he wants to get going. And Carson Wentz.
Correct. And right, and we've talked all season about how the lack of speed has just crushed their offense, and quite frankly, their secondary at corner and safety, they could use some athleticism. So, look, the Niners were an incredible story. I had them pushing for a wild card spot, and they did it obviously much better than that. I had them for a win range of 9 or 10 wins, and they eclipsed that. Great season for them, and you're right. Arguably the NFL's two best play callers, Andy Reid and Kyle Shanahan. How great is that, Geoff?
It's going to be fun.
Yeah, going to be a great Super Bowl. I'll be there in Miami, and we'll do a couple shows that week, and it's pretty incredible. 2 years ago, Eagles were playing the Patriots in Minneapolis, and Radio Row was in the Mall of America. Oh my God, it was so bad. It was
that was brutal.
You were there, right? You were there.
Yes, yeah, I was there.
We were like sardines. It was absurd, but this one, thank goodness, is the Miami Beach Convention Center. Oh, by the way, the weather that week will be in the mid-70s.
Very nice. That's about 69 degrees hotter than it was in Minneapolis.
Oh, yeah.
As I tell people all the time, I came back from that trip telling people that I spent more time in a mall than I've ever spent in my life, and I'm from New Jersey, so that says a lot. But, we were packed in there.
The only thing was good that week is I ate well. But other than that, I mean, it was absurd. I've never seen anything like it. But Look, it's been an interesting week. Obviously, Geoff, as you know, for the Eagles and coaching stuff and looking ahead of what could be for the 2020 season. Man, boy, things are moving along here.
Well, since we last have done a podcast, Adam, we were going through who's going to be the offensive coordinator, who's going to be the wide receivers coach, and who's going to be the defensive backs coach. And then you made a great point, and I hope everybody was paying attention. You kind of slid it in there, but it was newsworthy. You said something like, hey, I'm not even sure they're done firing coaches. Well, since our last podcast, the Eagles have added another vacancy, and that's defensive line coach Philip Daniels fired. And I wanted to start with that before we get into some of the splashier names, because I think this surprised people because the pass rush statistically was as good as it was the year before. Which was still pretty good. Maybe not as good as 2017, but still pretty good. And this is a guy that we mentioned last year when we reported that they were going to fire Chris Wilson and move on to Philip Daniels, that the players seemed to like Philip Daniels a lot more. They understood him. He's a former player. They related to him better. And again, so a guy who's well-liked and a guy whose unit was somewhat productive, you wouldn't think he would be on the chopping block and he gets fired.
Yeah, so this is the one, Geoff. As I told you about a week ago, I said I think this one might happen. Wasn't 100% sure, but from talking to multiple sources around the league, it sure seemed like that was going to happen. And just checking into it, well, why Daniels, who, by the way, Philip confirmed that he's out. He did on Twitter.
Right.
We wish him good luck, but there were two things when it comes to Daniels and productivity. Yeah, there's no question. There was some productivity, no doubt. Brandon Graham had a very good year. Boise, a terrific football player. But there were two issues here. So from a technique standpoint, they wanted the players to move along in that area. Some of the younger players need to improve in that area. That was a minor issue, but the big issue, I'm told, which is very interesting, situationally, Geoff, when it comes to matchups, when Philip needed to figure out a little bit better way to move players around and find the right matchup, and that did not happen consistently. See, here's where I think Schwartz could have helped him, and I'm not privy to what Jim said to him, but this is where you've got to coach your coaches. We've talked about offensively with Pederson, the biggest area he has is improvement is coaching his coaches better. He's just failed in that area. Needs to do a better job, despite being a terrific head coach. Jim is a very solid defensive coordinator, but I think he's got to help his coaches a little bit. And if you coach him up a little bit harder, you can probably get better results. And that's what I've been told by people that I trust, that it's just got to get better. Whoever the D-line coach is, and I'll give you a little bit of intel on that in a second, Geoff. It's not just throwing guys out there and just playing the wide nine. It's way more than that.
Right. And by the way, what you're saying falls in line with what we've talked about with the coaches. It's not – yes, you're judged by the performance of your players, but you're also judged by their development. And you look at guys like Josh Sweat, and, they traded a fourth-round pick for Jannard Avery, didn't see that much time, and Sharif Miller never played at all. I mean, you can make a kind of a legitimate argument that you didn't see great development from the young pass rusher. Certainly, we're still waiting for Derek Barnett also to reach his peak. So I think it's a fair argument to be made.
Yeah, I think that the matchup issue, that was the big one, where they wanted to figure out a way. Though Josh Sweat, now he definitely developed. Now the question is, how much did it have to do with coaching, or was it the natural progression? That's an argument that people can make, but I think from what I understand from a pure football standpoint, I think Pederson in the front office, when they graded the tape and they graded the players, they wanted to see them used a little differently for matchup purposes, and that didn't happen. Look, offensively, this was a problem for a decent portion of the season, though they had significant injury issues. Finding a way to win matchups, and Doug's great at it. But when we talked about pre-snap motion and the window dressing and other things that the Niners are doing, Andy Reid is doing, it comes less to about talents that you have; it's about how that you use them.
Right. So where do you think they go here for defensive line coach? Somebody more veteran, more experienced. They have Matt Burke here, and I know he coached linebackers, but it's not like that's the only position he's able to coach. I wonder if they maybe think about that.
Yeah, that's the one I was going to bring up. In-house, he would be the only candidate that I know of. Okay. Matt's a former defensive coordinator. Now he is really super smart, and he's really good with situational football. That's why I think if they stay in-house, it would be he. If they move out, it could be a variety of guys. They could look at a couple guys who are on the market. They could look at a couple guys who are contracts are up from other teams, and there'll be some guys out there, but I think it would be more from the veteran route if they stay with NFL coaches. There are also some terrific defensive line coaches in college football from top 25 teams that they could look at. And I love, and we'll get to offense in a second, I love what they're doing there. I love how they're thinking outside the box. So this is a very important hire because they've got to get this thing going, Geoff. They had 7 defensive ends on the roster, and you mentioned it earlier, and you're absolutely right. They need to get better production from these younger players. They all need to be factors, and their upside's got to get there.
Yeah, I want to address one thing really quickly on the defensive line coach because we get asked about it a lot on social media. And this happens a lot because a name gets out there. Brenson Buckner is a name who became available when the Oakland Raiders decided to get Rod Marinelli. And a lot of people think that would be a good fit for the Eagles because, hey, his unit did well last year. All I can say is this, as far as fit and identity, is that Buckner was in Tampa Bay last year. Vinny Curry was in Tampa Bay last year. And I always asked Vinny what Brenson was like. And he said that his philosophy is completely different than Jim Schwartz's. Buckner does not rotate defensive linemen nearly as much as Jim Schwartz likes to do. And if you go look at Oakland Raiders last year, he was the D-line coach. Their 2 DNs, Max Crosby and the first-round pick, Clelin Ferrell, both of them played north of 65 to 70% of the snaps, which is not, as we know and as most of our listeners know, not how it works with Jim Schwartz. So I'm going to say, without any knowledge or any intel, just using my analysis here, that it's probably not the right fit.
Yeah, I think Burke, from what I heard late last week, is that he's just so smart and understands how to move guys around.
We're
Now,
talking
the
about
technique,
Matt Burke now, right?
Yeah, Matt Burke.
Yeah.
But I can't speak to because he's not. I don't remember him ever coaching any D line.
Mm-hmm.
The technique stuff is something that that's got to be coached.
Right.
And if Burke doesn't have that, I don't know how they could go with him. But maybe he has that down. I can't answer that. But that's a very important part. I remember Mike Zimmer telling me, Geoff, that his DNs do not get on the field if they don't have the proper technique. He doesn't care who the hell they are. I thought it was really interesting. He told me that years ago when he was with Cincinnati. Was he Cincinnati or maybe his first year in Minnesota? Nevertheless, Zim said that you got to play with the right technique because they get off a certain way. Right. So that's something to keep an eye on if Burke does get the job.
All right, sounds good. You obviously seem a little bit intrigued by the offensive coordinator search. Graham Harrell being the big name from USC. Look, his what he did at USC can't be denied. They went from about 26 points per game to 32 points per game. That's a big jump. He is an air raid guy, though, and that is not per se a system that has had a lot of positives in the NFL. We'll see what happens in Arizona. I mean, Kingsbury and their quarterback Kyler Murray did all right for a first year. Nothing special, nothing awful, but I think that's what a lot of concern is. I've heard that from fans, is that why would you bring an air raid guy in to be your offensive coordinator in the NFL?
So what I'm told here, Geoff, it has very little to do with the air raid. It's about spread concepts and ideas and concepts. Mm-hmm. Sure, in the air raid, although Cliff Kingsbury, Greg Cosell told me, started really indoctrinating the tight ends in the second half of the season this year with the Cardinals, because the air raid at its core is 4 and 5 receiver sets with that's it. They really don't use the tight end very much, if at all. But he started to change it. But so the way it's explained to me here is that the Eagles are really looking for concepts and what he knows, not only about the tight end, because I know the Eagles have been a 12 personnel team, but let's not forget the Eagles were a spread West Coast, 16 and 17, especially during their Super Bowl year. And that to me is really what, if you're going to bring this guy, you're going to do a mixture of it. You probably would use less 12 personnel. It means you could probably split it up more. Or you're just looking to come up with some really brilliant ideas. And obviously, someone did their research. And by the way, Andrew Berry, part of his job, I'm told, is to put together lists for Howie and Doug of coaches that he's got his eye on. That he's a researcher in addition to everything else he does for them. That's part of his job. So we'll see what happens. And by the way, Berry interviewed Friday. Into the process, Geoff, he was the top candidate. That doesn't mean he's going to get the job for the Browns to be the GM. The Panthers, he'll never get the Panthers job because until they give him majority of the power, they're not. The Eagles are going to block him. Right. So that's kind of the way that thing's going to go.
So just my quick thought on Harrell is that I would be a little bit. I feel like because of his experience and that he is predominantly an air raid guy, that I would love to see him start off somewhere as a position coach and bring his ideas and then prove he's versatile enough to work his way to offensive coordinator. I'm not obviously running the Eagles or an NFL team, but I would be a little skeptical depending on who else is out there.
Yeah, now that's a fair point because remember, Mike Rowe told me last year that his job was the term he used was filter all the information from all the position coaches, and that he would have his ideas, get all their ideas for the game plan that week, plus his ideas, and present them to Doug. Then he and Doug, like Frank Reich would do, would put together the game plan starting after Friday's practice, going into the Saturday night meeting, and through the Saturday night meeting. So it's an important job. You're right. It's a really good point. Harrell hasn't coached in the NFL. He was a Senior Bowl quarterback. I was shocked that he wasn't drafted, but this is when people thought the air raid didn't transfer, and obviously that was not true when we saw Mahomes. And boy, I'll tell you what, Geoff, one thing on Patrick Mahomes, I know he looks like the best quarterback in the NFL right now. You cannot believe the split with personnel guys that I had for the 17 draft. So many of them did not like Mahomes at all because mechanics were bad, footwork was bad, sloppy mechanics. Oh, what happens? He goes to the Andy Reid and the whole thing changes.
How about that?
Seriously, it's incredible.
How about that? Mitchell Trubisky goes number 2 overall, and Pat Mahomes is there at 10th overall.
Now, DeFilippo, the quarterback whisperer, his job as the quarterback's coach is going to have to fix Trubisky. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, we will. Let's transition. Oh, also a name for OC. Now we're recording this on Sunday after the championship games. Earlier in the morning, Ian Rappaport, NFL Network, had said in one of his reports that he expected that the Eagles will make a call to the Chiefs to inquire about Mike Kafka, their quarterback's coach. Now, several days earlier, I think on either Thursday or Friday, the 16th or 17th, I tweeted that I have been told and continue to be told that Doug Pederson has not yet inquired about the availability of Mike Kafka. These two things can both be true. A couple of people hit me up on social media and said, I thought you said Doug wasn't interested. My tweet said he had not inquired yet. Yet is a big word about Mike Kafka. Didn't say he'll never do it. It was just to that point because we've been asked about Mike Kafka for about a week and a half now. So I just wanted to address it. So we will see. I think my gut feeling is no matter what, the Chiefs are going to do what they can to hold on to Mike.
Okay. So here's what I'm told. I checked into it last week. So it's unlikely, according to a league source, that the Chiefs will let him go. And here's why. Obviously he can. He's coaching the Super Bowl. But once the Super Bowl's over, if the Eagles try to wait, here's the issue. He's basically their passing game coordinator. He's very heavily involved in the game plan. Eric Bieniemy is a run game coordinator, and obviously their OC. Mike is extremely important, I'm told, by this source in putting together the game plan during the week. So I know Andy tries to do right by his coaches, and obviously he drafted Mike in Philly. I don't see him letting him interview after they're done playing. But I don't see him doing that unless it is play calling responsibilities. Doug has not shown the willingness to give that up.
Right. And let's be clear, because sometimes there's confusion about this. They can block him from interviewing. Some people say, I thought you can't block if it's a higher position and OC is hired in QB coach. No, that only applies for head coaching and GM candidates, if I'm correct, right?
Correct. 100% correct.
So Andy has blocked before. He said he doesn't like to do it. Usually, though, in this case, Adam, if you are going to block a guy, hey, man, the Eagles did it with DeFilippo, you give him a bump up in pay, you make him happy, and you tell him that you are the next in line. And being the next in line for Andy Reid is not a bad place to be.
No, it's incredible. And now with GM, you can block him unless it's real power.
Right.
The power's got to be the 53-man roster at a minimum.
Right.
Like the head coach, a lot of them have – where the GM has the 53, the head coach has a game day roster, which is the 47-man roster. So that it's got to be that, or teams could block the guy.
Do we have any updates on the cornerbacks coach or a vacancy or the wide receiver? Sanjay Lal is a guy that we kind of isolated. You had mentioned that they interviewed him a couple of years ago. He's out on the market now. I'm surprised we haven't heard about maybe even an interview or anything like that.
Yeah, and the funny thing is he'll have offset language on his contract. He had time left. I'm shocked that I believe I don't have the names yet. I think they either have interviewed a couple guys or they're going to interview a couple guys. And by the way, the last that I heard is that Roseman and Peterson were supposed to be at the Senior Bowl this week, interviewing coaches, and obviously going there. This is an important year because they have 10 picks. Part of why they're there is to interview coaches. So they need, as we speak, they need a D-line coach, cornerbacks or secondary coach, however they want to mix it up. Tim Halk is still there as their safeties coach.
Right.
Wide receivers and OC, they've got a lot of work to do there.
Yeah, let me ask you real quick before we transition out of the coaches, because we kind of talked about this idea about whether Doug should have the right to hire and fire coaches and whether ownership has a right to intervene. And we went through that a couple of pods ago. But you look now and you see Mike Rowe is gone after 2 years. That's somebody Doug promoted. Carson Walsh, the wide receivers coach, promoted last year, fired this year. 2 years ago, it was Gunter Brewer, hired 1 year, fired the next year. Philip Daniel, promoted last year, fired this year. Fair to question Doug's judgment on hiring coaches with all the turnover he's had over the last 2 or 3 years?
Oh yeah, on our last couple shows, I mentioned it. Doug's got to do a better job of coaching his coaches, and this is part of it.
But the funny thing is, they let him hire the new coaches, though. I wonder if at some point there has to be more.
Well, no, but Rose, as I'm told, is that the front office will be way more involved in this one. it's not good when you decide to promote coaches.
Mm-hmm.
In one hand, you're doing right by them, but you got to do you owe the football team, the organization, more. Your job is to win football games and to develop coaches,
No doubt.
and not promote them just because they work for you because you want to be nice to them. That's just not the way it works. So he's got to do a better job, Geoff. I'm glad you brought that up. It's the one area where there's a very, very fair criticism. He's a terrific play caller. He's an excellent head coach, but what he needs to understand is he's not an offensive coordinator / head coach. He's a head coach who happens to call plays.
Mm-hmm.
And the other part of his job is to coach his players, coaches, and develop everybody. And he needs to do a better job of it.
No doubt about it. Do you think loyalty might be some of the issue?
Yes, great point. That's probably the number one buzzword.
Mm-hmm.
Your loyalty's got to be to the organization. You want to be fair to your coaches, but you got to do a better job of evaluating them. I mean, I don't know. Here's the problem. Carson Walsh is a perfect example. What did he see to think that he could handle this job?
Right.
I mean, he's around him every day, but how do you miss like that?
Yeah. No, I agree with you. It's interesting because I don't know that front office people looking out for coaches is the best thing either. But here's a case where,
but more set of eyes, Geoff. Just
Yeah.
another set of eyes. I don't mind that.
Well, it'll be interesting to monitor what we're saying about the coaches next year at this time that he winds up hiring, right? Because that'll say a lot about the decision-making process this time around.
Fair point.
I want to finish this up with a few questions because a lot of people have reached out to us through #AskITB on Twitter. I want to get to a few. Before that, we'll pause 1 second for a word from our sponsors. Hey, it's Geoff Mosher. Adam Caplan and I love using Anchor for our Inside the Birds podcast every week. It's so user-friendly, anyone can create their own podcast, and you should too. Just download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Anchor gives you everything you need to start your own podcast from your phone or computer. Its creation tools allow you to record and edit your podcast for a professional sound, and Anchor will distribute your podcast for you to Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and so many other platforms. It can be heard by everyone, just like Inside the Birds. You can also make money from your pod with no minimum listenership. What are you waiting for? Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to create your podcast today. Hey, it's Geoff Mosher. Are you interested in money? Yep, I thought so. Well, on the Talk Money with Mesh Lakhani podcast, Mesh will follow paper trails, chat with experts, and break down complex ideas to bring clarity to the mystical financial phenomena and help listeners uncover the story behind their money. Each of these compelling stories will hit a broad range of subjects ranging from buying Bitcoin, dealing with student debt, and everything in between. So if you're interested in money, and I know you are, check out the Talk Money with Mesh Lakhani podcast on Anchor. All right, Adam, the biggest question, and I like this because this is kind of a response questions from our last podcast. Our last one was about, the defensive roster examination, and we talked a lot about, as you mentioned, a great quote, brown bagging it at linebacker. And that literally... I hope
people, it's just being cheap. That's what it's a scout game of that years ago. There was it was probably one of my first couple senior bowls. By the way, this would be my 19th Senior Bowl. The first Senior Bowl was Josh McCown. It's crazy. So the two terms I learned was brown bagging, which means being cheap at a position, and jag, just a guy.
Right.
You know that term.
Oh,
and I laughed my ass off when I heard jag. Oh, I was so fun. I teared up when I heard that the first time.
That's actually the most common scouting term I've ever heard because there are so many guys in the league that fit that bill. All right. So again, linebacker was the big question. So without pulling any one particular question, because about 3 or 4 people asked us this, the questions basically are, do you think the Eagles need to use a high draft pick on linebacker, or should they sign someone in free agency like a Littleton from the Rams, Schobert from the Browns? Kind of they're asking for what the blueprint is.
Well, Schobert's going to cost a lot of money. I mean, that's the problem with it.
Same with Littleton, I think.
Corey Littleton's a decent player. He's gotten better, but I wouldn't spend a ton of money. But just upgrade. It's the one area, Geoff, where they have not evaluated well enough in terms of getting high-level play. It's just been okay there. I mean, Nate Gary's a good story, former college safety, but he's a below-average player based on people I've talked to. It's just this is what they have, and he's their best. T.J. Edwards was a nice story to make the roster as an undrafted free agent, but they need better players there. We all know that.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's repeat what we said about linebackers last time because I think it's important. One,
Sure.
they're not going to sign a big name free agent linebacker. It's they've. When's the last time they did that? Right.
Dahani
Two.
Jones. I guess I can't
No,
remember,
no.
man.
I know, and people will bring up D'Amico Ryans or they'll bring up some other guys, and I say
That was
those
a
are
trade. Was that a
right?
trade?
Those are trades.
Yeah.
That's different.
Yeah.
And two, they're not going to draft a linebacker in the first round. I'm positive of that. I'm sure
I'm not going to bet. I'm not betting that one.
No, I would not, unless there was some great odds boost on DraftKings for like
right,
plus
100 to
5
one.
million. Yeah,
Yeah.
but no. So the probably you look at history. If there's a trade, maybe Howie, maybe Howie Roseman looks to improve it through trade market. If there's a veteran free agent, I don't know because you saw him sign two linebackers last year, Zach Brown and LJ Fort. Neither of them made it to halfway through the season, so I'm not sure he's going to be following that blueprint either.
Look, we know what their needs are. Obviously, wide receiver and corner. Linebacker's not one historically, other than Michael Kendricks, that they've invested a lot of draft resources in, but not that we're too early for the draft process to know who exactly the top linebackers are. But I'm to the point with this thing. If you could get a special football player, I'm not saying first round. I'm not opposed to doing the second round for not just the Eagles, for any team.
Right.
I know it's historically not something you invest a high pick unless a guy's special like Luke Kuechly, who just retired. But if you could get someone special, why not do it? And don't, like, if your draft board has that guy as, I don't know what pick number they have overall in the second round, but let's say they've got pick number 20, okay, whatever the pick number is, and if that's the slot for the linebacker, take the linebacker. Don't just trade out because you don't value the linebacker overall. I think that's just not the way you should do it.
Agree. Okay. Here's a great question. It's a big one from @Scott from Philly on Twitter. And he wants to know more about how the organization scouts in free agency and the draft. So I actually responded to him and I said, that's interesting, but can you be more specific? And he says, how can one scout get an edge over the other scouts? How is the department assessed by the organization? He's kind of interested in knowing a little bit more behind the scenes on how it works with the scouting process. So I think we could do a whole podcast on that. There's a certain level of scouts, Adam. You know that, right? There's a scout for certain regions of the country.
Yeah, there's
East
Coast,
college scout, there's
Midwest.
Right. There's pro scout who just does
the pro scouts.
Players.
Right. There's a director of pro personnel. There's a director of player personnel, which is a GM light, and then there's the general manager. But the Eagles, the way they do it, they have two divisions. There's the guys who report to Andy Weidel, who took over for Joe Douglas,
right,
and the guys who report to Ohio Roseman, which was really Andrew Barry and some other guys. And how he makes all the calls with a lot of input. He does from the coaches and his group. Andy Weidel will run the draft for Howie, as Joe Douglas did. And by the way, Tom Donahoe ran the 2016 draft. Did a brilliant job, I'm told, by multiple people. He ran it. It was just tremendous job that he did. He had great insight for Howie. He and Howie did it. It was obviously Howie's best draft. And Tom is a trust. This is a great move by Howie hiring him. Everyone loves him. Everyone loves the guy.
Yeah, and by the way, there are also advanced scouts who go to other games during the season of opponents that the Eagles are going to play in a week or two, and they scout those teams too. How they're judged and graded. Well, I mean, you got to look at the top of the totem poles. You look at Andy Weidel, who is the vice president of player personnel, the new Joe Douglas, and Howie Roseman, who's obviously the highest man in the organization, and even Jeffrey Lurie. They're all involved in meetings, and the guys at the top take notes about how the assistant scouts and the regional scouts and the pro scouts are all funneling their opinion, and they're judged on their opinions.
Right. Well, now Jeffrey's really not part of a lot of the stuff.
I thought he sits in the major meeting, like the war room. He's there.
Well, he is. Yes, he definitely is. Well, the scouts are too. Just about everyone is in there.
Right.
For the draft. Yeah, of course. But the part that I think happens, I know the Bucs just had their meeting. There's what's called a budget meeting, where the front office, the cap manager, the general manager, maybe the personnel director, will present their offseason plan, and ownership, with the team president and the owner, will present how much money they could spend in free agency. How much cash spending they have, And then if they want to go over it, they have to talk to them about that and get more money. Because I remember discussions with GMs and agents over the years will say, oh, nope, they're over their cash budget. They can't go there. They either have to restructure. Sometimes teams are so tight with it, not that these billionaires can't afford it. They just set a number and they just won't go over. It's pretty interesting.
Right. And one thing Scott wanted to add to his question is, and he was confused about, is there a defensive line scout in college who goes looks into all the defensive linemen? No. One scout covers an entire region and then covers the players in that region. So they have to be versatile. They have to know every position: quarterback, defensive line, cornerback, safety. So that's why these guys aren't just plucked off the street. They work their way up.
Yes, correct. And speaking of that, and I don't know that he's going to do this, but Connor Barwin, as I noted a couple weeks ago on Twitter,
yes,
people were like shocked by it. I didn't think it was a big deal because some of the reporters knew that he had been in the building where they saw him in practice. So Connor, I'm going to say, has been with the team since maybe sometime in November. It's really interesting. He beefed up to 265 because he still wanted to play. And, no one signed him. And then the Eagles brought him in to talk to him. He lives in the area. He loves it here. And Howie Roseman had a good relationship with Connor. And, Howie asked him what he wanted to do. It was explained to me. And Connor said he wanted to get into scouting. And he had been in coaches' meetings and had been at practice. And now they sent him on the road to the All-Star games. I saw him at the East-West. Saw him on the field there with a bunch of their scouts. And I saw Andy Weidel there and some other guys. And it's a great story. So he's technically the assistant to the general manager, special assistant. But I think he's just going to learn scouting, from several different levels. And what's really good about him? Since he just retired, he could really help them for the draft and free agency, because he could not only could he look at tape and see technique and see how hard they play. He could sit on these interviews for the draft interviews and watch body language and see how serious these kids are. Because who would know better than Connor, a high-level player who just retired, was a high-character guy. I mean, this is kind of a little bit of a value for Howie here.
Absolutely. So hopefully we did a good job there of explaining what goes on through the scouting chain and how it works. And that's going to do it for this edition of Inside the Birds, the leading podcast in Eagles Intel. I want to thank all of our listeners. Thanks to 97.3 ESPN, our partners and affiliates. And make sure you're checking us out from 2 to 6 every single day on the Sports Bash, the #1 rated show now in South Jersey from 2 to 6, Adam. You're a big part of that. So it's great to have you on. It's the first time ever that show has become #1.
It's a great show. When John McMullen comes on, he does a great job. You do a great job with those guys. Rothstein is the voice of reason. Gil's a great host, man. He's got great pipes. He just does a great job. I listen like 2 or 3 times a week. I mean, I enjoy it. I listen to a lot of it in my car, and their app is terrific. I didn't know a lot about the station until a couple years ago. I knew it was an ESPN affiliate. I've been on Mike's shows periodically over the years, but I listen a lot. I like the banner that you guys have, and obviously I love when you guys talk Sixers because I'm a diehard Sixer fan.
Yep.
And I'm so frustrated with so many of the things that are happening with them. But nevertheless,
we'll get into inside the Sixers.
Yeah, we got to do that, man. We got to do that. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, well, for everybody, if they don't know, they can download the free mobile app at 973ESPN.com. And, of course, Harry Mays and Eitan Shander have been kicking rear end also from noon to 2 every Monday through Friday. So we thank them. We thank PHLSportsNation.com, another great affiliate, enhancing the fan experience with their coverage of the Phillies and the Flyers, the Sixers, the Eagles, their podcast. They're just doing a great job churning out content. So make sure you head over to PHLSportsNation.com. We thank our friend and producer, Hunter Brody, Sports Talk with Broads on YouTube. You got to subscribe to that page because it is the most passionate Philadelphia fan takes you're going to see on the web, and that's saying a lot. So make sure you're checking out Hunter Brody on his YouTube page, Sports Talk with Broads. Big thanks to Todd Harriman's a big supporter of our podcast, and his company, Body Check Wellness. And again, make sure you're following us on Twitter at Inside Birds for our contests and giveaways, and checking us out on our YouTube page just on our YouTube page, Inside the Birds YouTube. So check us out there, and please, please, please subscribe. As always, we thank you all for flying with us Inside the Birds.
If you're listening to this, you obviously like podcasts, and you probably like music too. On Spotify, you can listen to all of that in one place for free. That's right, you don't need a premium account. On Spotify, you can follow your favorite podcast so you never miss an episode. You can download episodes to listen to offline wherever you are. You can easily share what you're listening to with your friends via Spotify's integrations with social media platforms like Instagram. Spotify has a huge catalog of podcasts on every topic, including the one you're listening to right now. Just search for Inside the Birds on the Spotify app or browse podcasts in the Your Library tab. And follow me, Geoff Mosher, so you never miss an episode of Inside the Birds. Spotify is the world's leading music streaming service, and now it can be your go-to for podcasts too.